How's everybody doing this fall break? Great. We're not going to talk about yesterday, okay? No one's going to talk about yesterday, okay? It's just one of those days, right? We just let some things go, right? All right. So today we're starting a brand new series called Losing Your Cool. Now, this series is not about losing your cool socially, like your cool points, and which is a good thing because people like me would never lose their cool because I'm always cool, so I don't have to worry about that. But this series is more about times in the Bible when people who know Jesus, know God, experience his love, experience all that he has to offer, kind of lose their senses and do some things that just don't really add up. And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking through what that looks like and when people act irrationally. Now, I've talked many times before about me coaching soccer. And, we've talked about from time to time this idea that I might be slightly competitive. I might slightly elevate my voice to project positive instructions to my team. But all of those things I did because I wanted our teams to win. Because the whole point of being in a competition is to win the game. Right? It's not there. I don't know what you've been taught in like this younger generation stuff, but if there's a game, there's a winner and there's a loser. I mean, and you go to win. You play to win, right? And so for the most part, winning is a whole lot more fun than losing. I can tell you that from experience, that winning is a whole lot more fun than losing. I say for the most part because there are times when you lose a game that you consider it a good loss. Right? Let's say you're going into a situation where you're a big underdog and the team above you is just supposed to like absolutely kill you, and you actually almost win that one out, right? They barely beat you. You leave that game going, hey, we lost that game, but that was a victory. Like we played our best game ever. We did our best. And so we have those scenarios, but then there are those games where you win. And I can tell you I can name like 3 or 4 games when I was coaching my kids soccer that we would win, and I was not happy at all. And people look at me like, what's wrong with you? Like, why can't we won? I'm like, yeah, but the team didn't play good at all. They didn't listen. They didn't do anything we told them to do. Everything we practiced, they didn't do any of that type stuff, right? Or like, it was not a good win. It was an ugly, ugly win. And so I wouldn't be happy. I would lose my cool, if you will, because everybody else is like, yay, high five, we won. And I'm like, no, that was awful. That was the worst, right? And so you get this idea of like, what is going on there? And I think a lot of you know what it means to feel this way. I think a lot of you have experienced this in your life. I mean, it is college football season, right? And so I have seen things on social media like this. That was a win, but it wasn't pretty. I've seen people put, hey, if we play that way next week, it ain't going to be a win. Right? I mean, they won the game. They should be happy for their team, but they're not because they saw the way their team played and like, that's not going to cut it. Like, you guys are better than that. In other words, we have higher expectations than what you're performing at. And typically when these people say that, they're not very happy. They're actually angry. They get frustrated. And when we lose our cool, we get angry and we get frustrated. And so we begin to say things. And anger is one of those emotions that's kind of a tricky emotion, right? Now, you guys live in LaGrange, Georgia, most of you do, which means you probably drove here this morning in LaGrange traffic, which means somebody probably pulled out in front of you or did something stupid on the road, right? I mean, you're in LaGrange, so that had to happen. And so you get angry, right? If they pull out in front of you, you get angry because, dude, I could have hit you. I have children in my car. That could have cost a life. Like, that was just stupid, right? We get angry at things like that. But anger is trickier than that, right? I mean, that's like a justifiable, of course you got angry for that. But have any of you ever woke up and for no reason just been mad? You know what I'm talking about? And you're just mad at the world and you have no reason why? Or you're mad at people and you just live at that point where I'm just angry, right? And you don't know why you're angry that day. I mean, it could be the smallest little thing that may occur every day, but for whatever reason, that day, It made you upset. It put you in that bad place. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this morning. But as we get into here, I want to point out that anger is not a sin. Anger is not a sin. What we do when we're angry, how we respond when we're angry, that determines if it's a sin or not. All right? Because a lot of people think when you're angry, you said, no, it's very clear in the Bible. We'll talk about that. Anger is not that sin. I just need to point that out before we get going in today, okay? The response is what we're interested in. So to better understand this, we're going to look at a guy today that had some anger issues, all right? And this is a dude by the name of Moses. Some of you may have heard of Moses. Good reason for that. Moses is mentioned 772 times in 710 verses in the Old Testament. And if that wasn't enough, he's also mentioned 79 times in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, the only person mentioned more in the Bible than Moses is David. Some of you are thinking, Jesus. No, Jesus is not mentioned that much, okay? Moses is David first, then Moses. I mean, that's how many times this dude's name is dropped, all right? And another reason we know that Moses was a big deal in the Bible is because he was one of those few chosen people who got a special name by God. Right? And I don't know if you noticed this, but God, Jesus especially when he's referring back to people, had names for people. Abraham, Father Abraham, the guy who had many sons, had Father Abraham. Remember that guy? He was called a friend of God. In Scripture, it says Abraham was a friend of God. David, who we just mentioned, some of you may know this, but David was said he was a man after God's own heart. And so Moses is one of these guys who gets a God nomer, something that God refers to him as, and this is what it was. And Moses is described as the meekest man on all the earth. Moses is the meekest man on all the earth. Now, that one doesn't sit well with me. I kind of struggle with that one a bit. Because Moses, right, the guy in anger who killed an Egyptian. Moses, the guy who, when he was wandering in the desert with people, asked God a couple of times, hey, can you just get rid of all these people? Like, if you killed all of them, that would make me have a good day, okay? This is the meekest man in all the earth. That's Moses, okay? So, little things there to struggle with, right? Now, Moses didn't get to enter the promised land because of his temper. You see, Moses had a front row seat. He got to see things that no one else saw, right? I mean, he talked to a burning bush. He went to Pharaoh and performed these miracles. And then these 10 commandments came and all this stuff, 10 plagues came and all this stuff happened. And then he takes the people out and he walks up to a big body of water. He's like, hey, can you guys split water, make dry land so we can walk through? And that happened, right? And then he talks to God face to face, gets the 10 commandments. I mean, Moses has seen all kinds of things. But he still loses his cool from time to time. And so, as all this is happening, Moses is doing all this, right? He's with Israel through the good times, through the bad times, all the times in between. And he's journeying with them, and he's told at the very end of his journey, hey, you don't get to make it to the destination. You who did all the work, got everybody to this point, you don't get to get in. And why? Why doesn't he get to get in? And it's all because he lost his cool. If you open your Bibles to Numbers 20 today, we're in the book of Numbers. It'll be on the screen. Starting with verse 10, it says this. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. So there seems, when you read this passage, there's got to be something else going on here, right? Like that was kind of he performed a miracle. I mean, he takes a staff, he hits this rock, water comes out, the people get to drink, and God's like, yeah, sorry, you're not going to get to go into the promised land. What's the background to this? What is setting this up where this is such a detrimental punishment for what seems like a miracle? Well, if we look back a couple of verses, we'll learn why. Starting with verse 2, it says this. But there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought this assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? I love that, by the way. Our cows are going to die too, right? It's fine. They have Chick-fil-A's. You don't need cows, right? So And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give them drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded them. So we see there's a problem, right? The people are thirsty. They're out here in the desert, in the wilderness. There's no water to drink, and they're mad about it. And so God has given Moses a solution to that problem. He says, I want you to go take your staff, and I want you to go tell the rock. The word tell means to talk, to speak, to utter things from your mouth, right? That's what he's supposed to do. But Moses walks away from this meeting with God, and he's angry. So angry that when he approached the rock, he doesn't do what God told him to do. Instead, he takes matters into his own hand. And so he gets so angry that he allows sin to creep into his heart. And instead of talking to the rock, as God said, he takes his staff and he smites the rock. He strikes it, hits it as hard as he can, pops it twice. Now, crazy thing is God still lets water come out. But he didn't follow God's instructions. And because he didn't follow God's instructions, God said, hey, you're not going to get to go in the promised land because you took my glory away from me. Now, there's a lot building up to this, right? Obviously. Moses has been leading these people, right? The journey should have been like an 11-day journey. It took them 40 years. Why? Because the people grumbled and complained all the time. And so Moses was in charge of this group of grumblers and complainers, people who just kind of ran their mouths all the time. And that wears on you after a while. Parents, you have kids, you understand, right? That's why on road trips, Dad always say, don't make me pull this car over. It's because they're tired. They just want to escape. It's not because they want to beat you. It's because they want to get out of the car and run away from you. Is what's really going on, okay? Because it's just so bad, right? And so this is what's going on. And Moses, that's why Moses prays a couple times, God, if you want to wipe them out, I'm completely fine with that, right? They grumble and complain all the time. And here's the crazy thing. As we talk about the cycle of sin, right? Like they finally see a miracle and they worship God and then they complain like a week later. It's like, y'all don't remember anything. God's always taking care of us. And there's this constant sense of people just annoying him to no end, right? It's like that when your little brother's saying they're touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, right? And you just want to smack them as hard as you can. And then you do, and then your dad and mom touch you with the paddle. Like those things happen in life, right? And the problem is because we get annoyed. We allow things to build up inside of us, right? And so we see this, Moses struggling with this. And listen, this is not an issue with whether or not Moses has faith that God can do a miracle. It's not an issue of Moses saying, you know what? Bringing water in a desert's tricky. I don't know. Look, Moses was all about water miracles, okay? We talked about already the Red Sea, parting of the Red Sea. That's a water miracle that he was part of. If you recall, when he was before Pharaoh, he took some water and he turned it into blood. And then he turned it back to water, right? Another water miracle done by Moses. Moses earlier in this Exodus had been told by God to strike a rock and water come out. So he had done that. And then there was another time where they came upon a pool of water, but the water was bitter. And God said, hey, go take a piece of hyssop stick, throw it in the water, it'll become sweet and okay to drink. So Moses knows all about water miracles. So it wasn't a lack of faith in him. It was the fact that he was angry and that he decided to do something in his own hand to do that. He wasn't angry over the fact there wasn't water. He was angry with the people, and it brought him under tremendous stress. Have you ever been in a place like that in your life? Maybe you're living in a place like that right now, where you're under tremendous stress, where you just feel like you're about to boil, right? You're just right there. At any moment, you're at that point. 24/7, you could just go. You have that anger in you, and it's just like, it's about to happen, right? All right? You're like Bruce Banner, right? The trick is always to be angry, right? And then you can control it. No, he's right there on the edge. Bruce Banner, by the way, is the Hulk, Okay, for you who don't know, okay, he's just always angry. All right, some of you look confused. I don't know. I know some of you aren't up on your comic book lore. That's okay, but it's not okay when I make a reference to it. All right, so he's at this point, right? So he's got this anger issue going on, and then you got the people who are just constantly nagging away at him. And again, I got the faith. I know God can make water come out, but I'm sick and tired of these people. They did a study on this, which makes it more interesting. But they think the time that this miracle happened was at year 39 of the Exodus. So it wasn't like a week into the Exodus and they were complaining. No, he's near the end of this 40-year wandering that the people, if you recall, they were supposed to get there. They sinned against God, and God said, you're going to wander for 40 years because everyone who was alive at the time that happened is all going to die. None of them will get into the promised land. So ouch, right? And so year 39, Moses is almost there. It's like you're on the road trip, you're going to Disney, right? And you're on the expressway and you turn off on I-4 and you're like, we're almost there. This trip is about done. And we're about to enter the happiest place on earth, except for the fact that there's kids in the car with you, and it's not the happiest place in the earth, because their kids are they've been in the car for 7 hours and they're just tired, and they're just going at each other, and you're like, shut up, we're about to go to Disney, it's gonna be great, one of those moments, kind of like some of you had in this church this morning, shut up, we're going to church, it's gonna be great, we worship God, those moments, y'all laugh because you've had them. Some of you had them about 37 minutes ago, And so we're doing this, and this is the point. This is this miracle. It's right here at the very end of the trip. All Moses has to do is look and say, hey, rock, can you make some water come out? That'd be great. And instead he beats it and he strikes it. It's a tough time. He's dealt with so much with these people. They fought wars, they fought battles, they've been hungry, and they brought quail, and the God gave them manna every day, and all this stuff has happened, and it just is tired. He's lost his perspective on the big picture. And he's lost his wonder at what God's going to do. You see, you can get to a place in your life where you become so angry, so stressed out that you lose sight of God in your life. That it becomes me-centric, me-focused, and you just get washed away. And all the stuff that God did in your life, all the stuff God's done leading you up to this point, you just forget about because you're mad. You're angry. And listen, this miracle that God gave him, dude, I know you're at the end of your journey. I'm going to give you the easiest miracle ever. Just talk to the rock. You ain't got to do anything. Just say, hey, rock, water. And he can't do it because he's got so much anger built up inside of him. And he strikes the rock. The meekest man on earth goes to a place of anger and is excluded from going into the promised land. That's how bad the situation was. Listen, anger can destroy a lifetime of work. One moment of anger can ruin so much. Moses learned that firsthand. So, most of the time in our life, God gives us simple instructions. And we can't follow them. And a lot of times we can't follow them because of our anger and the stress that we have built up in our life. So, what does this story of Moses and what he went through with his anger issues mean for us today, right? How does Moses losing his cool have to do with you and I, and what can we learn from that, right? Well, I think there's a lot that we can learn from Moses' story, considering that all of us at some point in time have been angry, will be angry. Some of you are angry right now, all right? Some of you are just mad. It's okay. I understand. It happens in our lives. We get to those points. And I think for us to understand this anger issue and to understand what God's word has to say about it, I think there's two questions that we have to answer today. And the first question we have to answer is this: why do we blow up? Right? Why do we just blow up? We're told in the Bible, Ephesians 4:26, the first part of that verse says this: be angry and do not sin. It says, be angry and do not sin. It sounds delightfully simple, doesn't it? If you're angry, cool, just don't sin while you're angry. But that's not easy, right? When you're angry, the first thing that pops in your mind is like, I'm angry, but you know what? I'm going to respond in a Christ-like manner to this. No, when you're angry, you react, right? Most people, when they're angry, respond and then think about it later. There's a response and the thought comes later. And when that happens, we begin to second guess ourselves. Like, why did I do that? Why did I respond that way? Why did I not respond better? Why did I have to lash out and attack? Because once it's out there, you can't bring it back in. So when we get angry like that, it's difficult for us to keep our perspective. It's difficult for us to think rationally, to pause and say, hey, that's why a lot of times people are like, when you get mad, count to 10. Why are you counting to 10? So you can think, give your brain time to catch up to your body, to say, hey, don't do that. But most of us now, we just explode. We go, and then we think, oh my goodness. So I want us to think about anger like a fire, okay? I'm gonna think like anger in terms of a fire. So what's happening inside of us is that we're building a fire, and this fire is called anger. So you can imagine if you're sitting in front of your fire pit that you got at home, or you're camping, you got this little fire ring, you're out there. So what you do is you go and you collect wood, right? And you put that wood on the fire, and a lot of times we're lazy, and so we get some gasoline, or we get some things to add to that. We put that on the fire, right? We get everything going, and we're waiting for the fire to happen, but there's no fire. I mean, the wood is there, the gasoline is there, there's a potential there for a fire, but there's something missing, and that's a spark. That's something to ignite that fire, right? It's only when we take a match and strike that match and toss it in there that the fire now occurs. But everything has been built there to have that potential for us to have fire. And this is how many of us spend most of our days. Internally, we have a lot of stuff going on inside of us. We've allowed the world, we've allowed circumstances, we've allowed events to happen in our life to build up inside of us, and we're stacking up wood and pouring gasoline on it. And we're just building and building and building, right? We take the opportunity in those situations to take every molehill we see and make a mountain out of it. And we just keep building this potential for an explosion. And when something comes our way, someone says something, someone does something, it's that match that drops on that pile, and off it goes. Now, I want you to take back to another scenario, right? And let's say that we're sitting in front of our fire pit, but we've not put any wood in there yet, and there's no gasoline. As a matter of fact, we swept it clean, and it's just kind of this dirty hole in the ground, right? Now, when someone comes up and they strike a match and they throw it into our fire pit, what happens? I'm gonna tell you what happens. There's a little bit of light. There's a little bit of flame, and then that match burns out, and it's all gone. In other words, we just kind of go right over it like there's no big deal. The difference there, what happens in that moment is there's nothing there to blow up. There's nothing there to burn. The match just burns itself out. R.C. Sproul once said this: anger is not in itself sinful, but it may be the occasion for sin. The issue of self-control is a question of how we deal with anger. Violence, tantrums, bitterness, resentment, hostility, and even withdrawn silence are all sinful responses to anger. You may have seen one of your responses up on that list. You see, anger is not necessarily a reaction to what is happening to us. Anger is a reflection of what is already going on inside of us. It's not about what's done to us. It's about how we react on what's inside of us. We blow up because we're already had everything inside of us to blow up. We've already stacked that wood. We've already poured that gasoline on it. We're just waiting for somebody. Sometimes we egg it on with some people in our lives. We're angry, we just want them to throw that match on, so we just push them a little bit. Other times it happens and we're not aware of it, but we've built that up inside of us. So understanding that leads to our second question: what can we do? Right? If blowing up is about us, not about what happens to us, then what can we do to keep us from blowing up? Well, the only way we can be angry and sin not is to be angry without blowing up, is to keep our heart and mind clean and clear. If there's no wood, if there's no gas, there won't be a fire. You see, the wood and gasoline that we talked about in that fire is our internal junk. It's the stuff that we've allowed inside to bring up grudges, hurt feelings, disappointments, worry, anxiety, discontentment. All of these, plus others that you can fill in for yourself that you've dealt with, are junk that we hold on to. And when this junk stays on the inside, it creates a breeding ground for disaster. Moments where we can blow up. But if we keep our mind and our hearts clear of junk, then we don't have that fuel to ignite. Spend time praying to God, meditating on his word, right? Spending time with him daily, letting go of things in your life. David prayed this prayer in Psalm 51:10. He said, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. That should be our prayer every day. God, create in me a clean heart. Renew this spirit within me on a daily basis. You got to cleanse yourself of the mental junk. You've got to forgive people and forget. Move past that point. You must seek forgiveness for things that you have done against other people. And you have to shed the natural stresses of the day. Listen, stress is not something you can avoid. Stress happens. But how well you hold on to stress is something you can change. You're going to find yourself in stressful situations. Friday, I was heading into town to go to the Walmarts. Joe was coming home and I had to buy some stuff for dinner. So I'm driving to town, and up here where they're doing construction on Hamilton Road, they have the cool little portable arm thingy that drops and tells you to stop and go, so it's one lane traffic. Well, our lane had just kind of gone, and I was still pretty far back, and the sign had dropped. And so people were starting to slow down. With a car that was sitting in the road to the right, I guess figured because there was the crossing down that everybody was going to stop, she pulls out in front of me. I'm literally in front of the high school boys away from broadsiding this car. Slamming on brakes, and she's pulling out like at 2 miles an hour. That was stressful, right? I was a little stressed. I said, I hope you get where you're going safely. I hope you have a nice day. Yeah, I did. I mean, translated differently in another language maybe, but there's one of those moments where you're like, heart, everything's in your throat, and you're like, can I breathe right now? I mean, it's one of those moments I would have killed her. I mean, if I had hit a broadside, I would have killed her. And I would have had to live with that, but she's the one who pulled out in front of me. It was a stressful situation. And see, I can hold on to that, and that anger and that malice and everything else, or I can let it go. And unfortunately, I have no clue who that person is. I'm not going to hold malice towards him. I remembered it so I can share it with you today. And I'll probably forget about it because I'm old and I can't remember my kids' names. So, I mean, it's all good. So, I'm not going to hold that grudge. But we see this over and over again. We have to forgive people, let go of stress. We read in Ephesians 4:26, be angry, do not sin, but there's more to that verse. It says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Now, many of you have read this and have used this in your life as, I'm not going to let myself go to sleep tonight when I'm angry, right? Marriage relationships, hey, if we get in a fight, we're not going to bed until we've reconciled that fight. That is fantastic. That is great. And that verse can mean that, but I think that verse means something else more. That word used here, anger, that specific word, is also a word for exasperation. Exasperation is stress. In other words, do not let the sun go down on your stress. You see, this may have nothing to do with another person. It's not that your spouse made you mad. It's just that you've had a rough day. Maybe you got a big day at work tomorrow. Maybe you got a huge test at school tomorrow, and you're stressed, and you're thinking, I'm going to go to sleep and sleep it off. First of all, when I'm in those situations, I can go to bed, but I really don't sleep, right? Which makes me even worse the next day. My mind just races all night long, worrying and exasperating myself over a stressor. I got to come to grips with that stress. If it's a big test for school, well, I didn't study for school tests, so I'll skip that one. If it's something big for work, my situation is this, did I do everything I was supposed to do beforehand to make it be successful? Right? In other words, did I prepare? When I first started preaching on a regular basis, I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't sleep on Saturday nights. I was so nervous about Sunday mornings. Was I going to give a good message? Was it going to be okay? Would people still like me? Not that they ever liked me anyway, but would people maybe like me? These are things I stressed about. But God's given me peace. Last night I would have slept like a baby, except my body was sore from doing yard work for 2 days straight. But I don't worry about that because I've done everything during the week to prepare myself for Sunday. I know I'm good. I know I'm okay. As a matter of fact, I read over it Saturday night one more time just to be like, yep, I'm good with that. I got a big project at work tomorrow. All this stuff I have to do. Well, did you do the work? Well, yes. What else do you got to worry about? What somebody say, well, you haven't done anything yet, so don't worry about it. Well, they might say that, well, you already have the answer. You're good. When I was a student pastor, I would go to bed every night thinking I hadn't done enough. There's one more kid I could have called. There's one more this I could have called. Guess what? That's 100% true. But at some point, you have to look and say, I've done good work. I have done enough for today. I don't have to call 3,000 people in one day. I can call 10 and say that was a good amount of talking to people. There's other things I need to do with my life. Like I have a family. Maybe I should do stuff with them. You see, stress is something we put on ourselves. It's something we build within us. It doesn't have to deal with other people. It has to do with how we handle ourselves. Sometimes we just have to let go. We have to do things to unstress ourselves. Whether it's prayer, meditation, maybe it's going for a walk, taking a run, maybe it's talking to somebody else. Find ways to unpack that stress before you go to bed. Now, we're talking about anger and we've talked about stress today. And before we close, there's something I feel of responsibility to talk about this morning. It's in this vein of losing control, but we're approaching a pretty big day for our nation coming up. We'll be voting very soon for new political offices. And so in the vein of losing our control, I just want to talk to you real quickly. I don't know if you remember the last 2 elections, but after both of those elections, people lost their ever-loving junk. People in our nation went absolutely crazy. They lost their cool. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was shameful. If I knew other people in the world were watching, this is my nation. Like when my family does something dumb, when Ben does something stupid, which he's never done, but if he ever were to do something stupid, I would be ashamed that he did that, right? Which he has done. I just not going to say them out loud. Because they're shameful, right? There's so many things my parents are not going to tell other people I did because it's embarrassing. And to be an American, to know how we responded to an election, is embarrassing for no other countries to look at us and say, wow, look what they get when they don't get their way. Here's the thing. Early voting starts October 15th. So I got to get this in now because some of you are going to start casting ballots sooner than later. Voting is a big deal. It is your voice in the future of our nation. It is your civic responsibility that each and every one of us who is of age needs to go and vote. The only thing more unacceptable than the behavior of people after election is the fact that there are people who don't go out and vote. You've been given a voice. You've been given the opportunity to say your piece, and you refuse to do it. Well, in the election, you'll talk bad the rest of the time, but you won't do anything about it. You see, voting is a responsibility. We have a civic responsibility. And responsibility means something we need to do. We need to get that done. But it also means when you vote, you need to vote responsibly. Let me tell you what irresponsible voting is. Irresponsible voting is voting for a person. Irresponsible voting is voting not because it's that person. I'm going to vote for anybody but you. That's irresponsible voting. Here's why I tell you that. If you're looking for the perfect candidate, you will never find them. They are people. They make mistakes, and they have to live with those mistakes. Difference is, you and I make mistakes. We just don't have the media digging into our past, bringing everything to the forefront of America's attention. And some of you are like, thank God. We should be voting on beliefs, values, morals. That's what we should vote on. When we vote and we want to vote responsibly, we should look at what people represent, not who they are. Each candidate has a belief system that they hold to. And that's what we should be voting on. But here's the thing, to be responsible, we need to understand those beliefs. And we need to compare those to what the Bible has to say. Not what social media has to say. Not what your favorite media outlet has to say. Not what your friend says, not what some celebrity says, but what does the Word of God say about that issue? And what person who's running for office, regardless of their party, regardless of their background, holds up more biblical values than the other person? That's where my vote goes. I vote for God every election. He's represented in imperfect creatures who are going to do dumb and shameful, embarrassing, and stupid things. But my voice is a voice for God. Now, after I vote and my voice is a voice for God, then I turn my voice to God. 1 Timothy 2:1-4 says this. First of all, then I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and all thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good and is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desired all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Listen, when you cast your vote, whether that person you vote for wins or loses, it's your job to pray for them. It's your job to support them. It's your job to make sure that they understand that there are people who are praying for them. Listen, if we spent less time on social media talking about our country, talking about our leaders, and spent that time instead on our knees before God praying for those leaders and praying for our country, that would bring about change. That's what's going to make the difference. No person is going to bring that difference. God is going to bring that difference. And then maybe we would begin to see things God's way and not our way. But it's not what I wanted. I wanted them to be in office. I really don't care. I really don't care who you vote for. I really don't care what you think. I care what God thinks. I care what God says. Listen, whatever happens on election day, God has allowed it. Some group of people didn't decide to come together and vote and like cast off God. God's like, oh no, they were too powerful for me. That's not the case. God allowed it. Ask Job what God allows in your life. Your job is to accept what God has allowed. David, we mentioned him earlier, the number one mentioned guy in the Bible. So David was anointed king, but like for 20 years, the current king was still king, right? And he was chasing him down, trying to kill him. And twice, God delivered Saul into David's hands where David could have killed him. Here's David's response, 1 Samuel 24:6. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. Whoever wins this election, God allowed to be an election. He allowed them to be our leader. And who are we to lay a hand on the Lord's anointed? Our job is to pray for them. If people are like, I'm not praying for him, he makes bad choices. All the more reason to pray for him. If he's making bad, dumb choices, pray that he makes good choices. Like, why do we like, I'm going to spite you by not praying for you? We're spiting ourselves when we do that. Pray for our leaders. Don't let anger take your place. Let love, compassion, mercy, steadfastness, let that take its place. Bottom line, whatever happens, God allowed it. We have to make our peace with it and pray for that person. John C. Brogger, a Christian writer, a missionary, wants to put this. Anger and bitterness are two noticeable signs of being focused on self and not trusting God's sovereignty in your life. When you believe that God causes all things to work together for good to those who belong to him and love him, you can respond to trials with joy instead of anger and bitterness. The meekest man in all the earth fell into sin because of anger. After all those years of struggling, Moses failed to obey God in a big way because he was filled with frustration, exhaustion, and stress. When that situation of water presented itself, it was a match that ignited all that stuff he carried inside of him. And he blew up. Anger is a natural emotion. God gave it to us. And it can be used for his glory. And it can be used to propel goodness into the world. But many times, we walk around with junk in our hearts. Like they used to say, garbage in, garbage out. When we erupt, that's what comes out of us. We let that stuff say soaked in gasoline. It doesn't take much to ignite it and send us going. But with God's help, we can clear our hearts and our minds and make a difference and glorify him.